Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Kate Nielsen and I'm AAUW's Director of Public Policy and Legal Advocacy. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for joining this important conversation tonight. We're going to talk about governing during a crisis. Everyone's lives have been upended by this coronavirus pandemic, some more than others, but so many different people are working together to make sure that we get through it. Tonight, we're joined by a great panel of 4 state legislators who will share their insights into what this all looks like for them and how strange it is to govern in this strange time. With that, I'm going to hand it over to AAUW CEO Kim Churches to welcome us all. Kim?
Hi, good evening or afternoon to everyone participating. I'm so grateful you could join us today for this very important conversation. As many of you know, we've been producing weekly webinars to really tie into where AAUW's mission is working to advance equity, but also talk, like as we will tonight, about how geography matters. And in a society such as the United States, where federalism is key, geography matters in how we're dealing with this pandemic, as well as the economic repercussions that are facing so many of us. So I really invite you to sit back and truly listen as you're getting a good landscape view from these extraordinary public servants and elected officials tonight about how they're dealing on the ground right now with economic stability for their citizens, as well as ensuring their public health and safety. So with that, I just want to say thank you. Please continue to join us. If you've missed some of our previous ones, you can find them on our website at www.aauw.org, and I'm sure I'll be Zooming with you all again in the near future. Back to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Kim. I also want to acknowledge a few other colleagues who are on the line tonight and helping out. Nakia McFarlane and Letty Bustillos. Nakia is our engagement associate, and she handled the promotion and a lot of the technical aspects of tonight, so thank you very much for that. And Letty is our federal policy manager, and she's going to be helping out with the Q&A tonight. So as I said, please put any substantive questions in the Q&A box. It'll be a lot easier for us to get to your questions and manage them, and anything technical can go in the chat box. So when I started thinking about pulling together this panel, I tapped many friends of AAUW who we've worked with over the years. I knew I wanted a diverse panel, racially, geographically, politically, and I'm so thrilled with the speakers that we have with us tonight. However, I have to warn you, there's one way in which this panel is really not very diverse, and that each of our speakers come from the minority party in their state and are from a different party than their governor. But I think that should make for a really interesting discussion as we talk about how this crisis and governing is impacted by different partisan differences. So I look forward to diving into that a little bit more. The other thing that's interesting about this panel is that our speakers come from really interesting committees that they head up. So we have health, aging, education, and election committee members all represented tonight. So again, I think we're going to have some really interesting perspectives on how they're working through this crisis. With that, I'd like to introduce our great panel. First, we have Senator Lori Berman. She's joining us from Florida. She's a Democrat and ranking member of the Health Policy Committee. She's served in the legislature since 2010, was first in the House, and then elected to the Senate in 2018. Next, we have Representative Stephanie House, who's with us from Ohio, my home state, and she's a ranking member of the Ohio Aging and Long-Term Care Committee. She's served in the Ohio House since 2015. Next, we have Senator Tim Knopp, who hails from Oregon. He is a Republican and the ranking member of the Public Education, Appropriation, and Labor and Business Committees. He served in the House from 95 to 2005 and was then elected to the Senate in 2013. And finally, we have Rep. Athena Solomon, who is with us from Arizona. She's a Democrat and a member of the Legislative Council, Elections, and Rules Committees. She's the minority whip and began serving in the Arizona House in 2017. I really appreciate all of you being with us tonight and sharing your insights. I think it should be a really, really interesting conversation. So let's dive in. First, I'd like to ask just what things are like right now. What's the status of your legislative session? What does it mean, practically speaking, to your constituents, the work that you're doing? Can you just tell me about the environment right now? Let me start with Senator Berman.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for putting this forum together. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with my fellow legislators. It is crazy right now. it is beyond, just as everybody in their lives are having things that are so different and so unexpected, that is how it is for us as legislators. Our session in election years, we end our session in March. So that was great. We did our session in January, February, and March. And March 14th, we ended. So we got all our legislative work done. If it was a non-election year, we wouldn't have been finished even now. We would have been finishing right now, so it would have been disastrous. We are busier than ever. More people are calling on our office for help. It is a crisis all around in every single area. Not only are we facing the healthcare crisis, but we have the economic crisis, we have food insecurity, we have domestic violence. So we are just overwhelmed right now, but doing the best we can to try and help our constituents.
Thank you, Senator Berman. Representative House, how's it going for you?
Well, Ohio, so, our legislature, we meet year round. And so it's interesting, going back into session, we have, committee rooms, people are scattered throughout, practicing social distancing. Some of us are wearing masks, some are not. That's even that is partisan, unfortunately. And when we look at just the work of what we are hearing from constituents, unemployment has been a major issue in Ohio. You have loved ones from our men and women that are incarcerated, loved ones calling. For those also family members that are in nursing homes, long-term care, it just is issues that are raising to the top. And then, as Ohio has begun this reopening of sorts, the issue on childcare. So those are some of the things that really have been coming to the point. And then, the budget, that is on everyone's mind, because we know our state, as many states across this country, the state budgets, local governments are financially really not in a good place. And we're going to have to make some tough decisions in the near future and probably in the foreseeable future as well.
Thank you. Senator Knopp?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you. So in Oregon, our session was February and the early part of March. However, nothing really happened in our session because about 2/3 of the way through, the Republicans in both the House and the Senate decided that they were going to essentially deny a quorum and boycott the rest of the session. I was the only Republican in the Senate to stay in the building. And then with 3 days left, my Republican colleagues came back, and then the Democrats left. And so I was lonely for quite a while. But literally, since nothing happened, obviously the coronavirus was just starting to become known in early March, and we were starting to realize that this could be an issue. Didn't realize how big of an issue it was going to be. We were in a fairly early state to shut down, and so that has opened up about a $3 billion hole in our otherwise about $25 billion general fund budget. And so we will be heading into special session here probably in the month of June, and we'll have some difficult decisions to make, but that's where we currently stand.
Thank you. And you got a taste of being lonely before everybody else did.
That's right. If they were going to rewrite history, the Republicans would have said they were starting to practice social distancing even before people knew it was popular.
Rep. Solomon, how about you? What do things look like in Arizona?
Thank you, Kate, for having me join this panel as well, and everyone. It's interesting to hear a little bit a snapshot of what each legislator is facing. I know in Arizona, this is even in good times pre-COVID. Our state typically ranks last when it comes to health outcomes, various health outcomes, education. So it's no surprise to also have the unfortunate title of you can literally pick any state and the District of Columbia, point to that state and know that that state has done more testing per capita than Arizona. So we are at the bottom in testing our constituents and testing Arizonans to actually get an accurate picture of the growth and spread of COVID-19 in our state. And also, we are one of the states with the largest number of sovereign tribal nations. And one of our nations, the Navajo Nation up in northern Arizona, has had the highest per capita cases and deaths, I believe, in the country at this point, greater than any other state in the country. And so, in Arizona, we see it all, right? We see great health disparities among different demographics in our people. We see a governor slow to respond. Even though we have not flattened the curve, our state ended up making some national news when the governor announced plans to start rolling out the reopening of our state, but also started revoking critical data for our university professors and academic experts to continue modeling for different circumstances of what reopening would look like for Arizona. And I think it's because, so our stay-at-home order ends this Friday, ends the 15th, and none of the experts would back up or argue that we would be safe to reopen things prior to May 30th. So that's what we've expected, or that's kind of the leadership that we've seen at the executive level. And then at the legislature level, I mean, I know we'll have more time to really dig deeper into this. So I would say the 3,000 foot level is the Republicans control both chambers. My caucus, we are down by one person. We are one person away from having a 50-50 split. So, I mean, we're neck and neck when it comes to numbers. And yet in my chamber, especially, you still see that hyper partisanship. And unfortunately, the Speaker of the House has been completely immobilized by his own caucus, who, some of which who still think that this is a regular flu and have not been practicing social distancing, have been attending these Open AZ, Open America rallies, hugging people, not wearing masks. And so those are some of the loudest voices in his caucus. So we've just been completely experiencing whiplash. One day we're going to go back into session. Literally less than 12 hours before we're supposed to come in, we're finding out through a press release that there's no business, there's no work to be done. So that's just kind of some of the roller coaster that we're on here in Arizona. And, it's just, I can speak firmly as a member of the Democratic leadership team in the House, but I feel comfortable also speaking on behalf of the Senate Democrats. Like, we're just ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work and help the people right now waiver this crisis, and we're in it for the long haul.
Quite a lot of challenges that all four of you are dealing with, and I appreciate and applaud you, and applaud all the care that you're putting into this. One thing that you brought up was the tribal nations, but I'm just curious, in general, each of your states has different unique populations that you have to be aware of, and the different pieces and struggles that different communities are facing. I know for me personally, so I live in the District of Columbia, and there was recently some data that was released, sort of very fine point data on where the virus is spreading in our community. And I live very, very close to a jail. And on the map, it has far and away the highest rates. And then my community, which, is 2 streets over from the jail, we're talking feet, has one of the lowest rates of infection. And so obviously this really varies from population to population, and those who are incarcerated are a unique population who need to have special care given. As you said, the tribal nations, various populations of color are experiencing this and getting hit much harder than others. Can you each talk a little bit about how you're taking your constituencies into account and making sure that the response isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but a one-size-fits whoever needs it? approach and what that looks like. Rep. Solomon, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm the state support for the Navajo Nation has been scarce. So unfortunately, our reps from that area and our senator, most of the nation is comprised in one district, and they've done a phenomenal job to make sure that they're working closely and collaboratively with tribal leaders. But unfortunately, the tribe has had to go out of state. The tribe has had to rely on celebrity focus and nationwide asks because the state really hasn't stepped up and provided enough support. So in a state like Arizona, unfortunately, I think that we'll continue to see those racial divides. And then I'm so glad that you brought up our prison because the state's position on releasing essential COVID-19 data, not only for inmates tested and testing positive, but more specifically to tracking and tracing staff, since we know that the the incarcerated people, if and when they become infected, will be so because of people on the outside coming in. And at a couple press conferences ago, the governor basically, both for that and data relating to long-term care facilities, told the media, paraphrasing, but sue me for the data. It was just absolutely insane. So my caucus has just been very much pushing on the prison director. We've been relying, the ACLU just filed a lawsuit against one of our private prisons. But it is, prior to COVID-19, there has already been, in our state-run prisons, there has already been a 2012, so that's now an 8-year ongoing lawsuit on behalf of the incarcerated people, the over 40,000 people that we have locked up just in the state system, not including our jails, because of the neglect of the healthcare for incarcerated people. So COVID-19 has just completely exacerbated and completely, it's just a waiting time bomb. But the problem and part of the struggle is getting the prison to agree to test everyone, from staff to inmate to supervisors, and trying to get some of those answers. I think the last thing I'll say about that is, in Arizona, it's such a black hole that for 2 weeks at the beginning of April, when we were learning that there were people testing positive in the prisons for COVID-19, we were asking for the update of the status of whether or not the people have recovered, whether or not they are still alive. On Friday, we spoke to the director. The director told us everyone who has COVID-19 in the prison is still alive. Monday, we found out that actually the first person died of COVID-19 2 weeks earlier. So like, that's the kind of just black hole that we're dealing with. And it's just going to continue to take pushing in Arizona to get the most basic of answers and the littlest of action that already should be the bare minimum.
Tragic. Senator Knopp, how about you? How are you dealing with different populations needing different responses?
Well, we have a very diverse state, and so there's about 5 counties that make up about 70% of the COVID cases in Oregon. And so I live in the middle of the state. If you would look right behind my head, that's about where I would be on the Oregon map. And so everything that goes out east, there are very few cases. And so Friday, probably about 20 of Oregon's 36 counties will reopen in some way. We've had a stay-at-home order, but there have been industries that have still been working. The population that we're most concerned about is the Hispanic population and farm workers, who are getting this at a much more rapid rate in Oregon than other populations. And so we're working on that particular issue. It's of great concern. And so hopefully we will have some legislative action and more direct aid to our farm worker population that kind of resides right along the valley on the west side in Oregon.
Thank you. Rep House, how about Ohio? What's it look like for your varying populations that you're trying to take care of and address the needs of?
Yeah, so here in Ohio, what you will see, the disparities within the African and American community throughout Ohio when you look at even like hospitalizations and deaths, and also what is happening within those congregate areas like prisons and nursing homes. And because like data is only prisons given daily, but nursing homes is only given weekly, and then the data is less. So it like data and getting information is problematic. So that's one thing on the health side. And then now that we know that there is this CARES Act funding that's coming to the states, really trying to advocate to ensure that resources are going to where we know there are problems, right? Like it would seem like a very natural response, but again, that's not the case. Even when it came down to the closing of business and establishments, when it came to initial economic recovery for businesses, what you find out, and we're still working on getting that data, but who actually received the money, right? You see it is abysmal numbers that are coming out for, Black and minority owned companies. And these are things, it's like, communities of color are just getting hit. Black communities are getting hit health-wise, economic-wise. And when you look at a state's response and obligation with systems that have intentionally and systematically cut groups out, you have to have voices. And, being president of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, we are continually to really push Ohio to do right by people, right? These are our people. Right. And we got to do right by them. It is not okay, even when we talk about like social determinants of health, which is cute, but we don't talk about the systems that created those social determinants to begin with. We didn't talk about, redlining. We're not talking about people being cut out right now. We care about frontline workers. Well, people have been pushed into these jobs, low income, low wage jobs to have to work, and so we have to do a better job of continuing to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be, and getting the resources to people. And it is all interconnected into democracy and voting. We had a whole election stuff that went along. Like, it's like the focus on people. We just need to be more focused. And I know we have sometimes, because Ohio is a very Republican ran values based, but what the resources that come in, it comes from everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so just because you are leading, that does not mean you are the smartest in the room. You have all the ideas. And so we just have to do a better job of listening and doing things differently to truly solve problems. And we just got to have those voices continuing to push for us so that people can not just be okay and survive. We got to get to a place where people can thrive in this new reality with COVID-19.
Indeed. Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Senator Berman, which populations are you trying to help and how are you doing it?
Yeah, so we also have the issue where we have 3 counties, even though Florida is a huge state, we have 3 counties that have about 60% of the COVID cases, and they're all the contiguous Southeast Florida counties of where I live, Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Dade County. And what we are seeing is, and it's the stereotype that many of you think of Florida, and that is that we have an elderly population, and that's a very high risk population. So 40% of our deaths in Florida have been people who live in a long-term care facility or in a nursing home. So it's really scary. And it's such the same kind of petri dish that, a prison is when you have these people living together. unfortunately, you're creating this situation where the disease can spread rapidly. We are working very much on a county level, which has actually been really great for us. All our congressional delegation and our state delegation and our county delegation have been holding meetings twice a week. And we talk about the issue of nursing homes. And so we have set up, and it is statewide too, they have strike teams that are composed of National Guard members that when they hear about one of these nursing homes, they go in and they start testing everybody, and they start making sure that they're isolating the people who need to be isolated. And then we're just like everywhere else, we have problems with high numbers of Hispanic, high numbers of African Americans. So one of the really cool things we started doing in our county, and I think elsewhere it's happening too, is we're doing mobile testing. So we'll go to anybody's home. People don't have to have a car. I mean, we were told at our meeting this morning there are now 45 testing sites in Palm Beach County. We are a pretty big geographic county, but that's a lot of testing for just one county. So you've got almost everywhere covered, but if you can't get to a testing site, we'll come to you. And that's really being done a lot through the county. And then we have the same issue with the prisons. We just have a big outbreak in one of our private prisons. And also we have the same issue where they are not giving us the information. And all of it, they've actually prohibited the medical examiners in Florida from reporting on COVID deaths. And instead, only the Department of Health is now allowed because the numbers didn't jive. So now they're not letting the medical examiners report on it. But the good news is that we are working together very strongly as counties to try and reach out to the populations that really need to be addressed because of the higher risks.
Right, thank you. Certainly a lot of very real challenges from both the immediate to the long term and looking backwards and how we think about going forwards. I know that a lot of people are talking about the new normal and wanting to make sure that the new normal doesn't look like the old normal because I think a lot of the problems that we've inherited contribute to how we got to this situation. And wanting to make sure that whatever new looks like doesn't replicate issues of the past. And I know that as someone who works on policy and works in politics all day long, the partisanship is certainly tiring. And I can only imagine that all four of you get very tired of it. I know each of you has mentioned it in various ways in some of your comments thus far, but I'm wondering if you all can talk a little bit about how this crisis has shaped partisanship in your particular legislatures. Is there any hope? Is there a chance that we're going to push through this, that this is a light that could bring people together, or no? I see shaking heads, so you're going to dash my hope. But I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about what it looks like. And while my hope is that there's some optimism, I also realize I don't want to sugarcoat it. And if it's bad news and we look, more divided than ever, feel free to speak to that as well. But I'll let you all chime in as you wish instead of calling on you if you want to just talk a little bit about what partisanship or bipartisanship looks like in your legislatures these days.
Well, I'll start. This is Ohio. Look, no, all that come by. I'm just being real and honest with people. I mean, because the thing that people need to understand at the end of the day, in basically every legislative chamber, politics is always at play. We are in an election year. It is in a presidential election year. Even when it comes to COVID-19, I have colleagues on the other side that are talking about like this is a made up Democratic conspiracy to get rid of President Trump. Like these are the colleagues that I am working with, and it is so unfortunate, but it's real, and so even, we have the dynamics where in my chamber in the House, they are really, we just passed legislation last week that would strip the Department of Health director from issuing any health directives. I mean, it all has to come through the legislative chamber. And we know, like, if that was the case in Ohio, anyway, so I can just tell you in Ohio, I don't see how there is a lot of hope for substantive changes to make Ohio better for all Ohioans. And that's unfortunate. There are some things when it comes to funding of releasing resources, but even then, there's a mentality of people, wanting to directly control that and not, even give local communities their share of the pie, because it all wants to come from the state, because there are different value systems depending on where people are, according to party affiliation. So sorry for the bad news, but that's Ohio. And that's my take of Ohio. Somebody might think something differently.
I appreciate your reality. Yes, Senator Berman?
Sure, I'll chime in a little bit about Florida, and it's not any rosier of a picture, unfortunately. So, as I mentioned, we passed our budget on March 14th. So we knew a little bit about COVID when we passed our budget, but not a lot. And our budget year starts July 1. So obviously, all the assumptions and everything in the budget are now out the window. The sales tax is not going to be anywhere near what we thought it was. We don't have a state income tax, so we rely very heavily on tourism and sales tax. So we asked, the Democratic Party asked for a special session to go back and revisit the budget issues, and we're having tremendous problems like Ohio with unemployment compensation, with people being paid. So we asked for that issue to also be discussed, and we also asked for voting to be discussed, because we have a big election coming up in November, and we've got to figure out how we're going to be able to do it. And all the Democrats asked for a special session, and we have a Republican majority in both the House and Senate, and a Republican governor, and they denied it. And now they're even saying that there's no reason to have a special session at all. And I really think it's because they know that if we go up to Tallahassee and there is a special session, they're gonna look really bad, because things that they've done have not been handled effectively. So in effect, they're using the lack of a special session to muzzle us, so that we don't have a forum to talk about it. So it's really disturbing, because we need a special session. We need to fix all these problems. We need to get up there and discuss what we're going to do. And right now, we're kind of wondering how they're going to try and fix the budget. I mean, there is one legislative committee, and I guess they're going to try and throw everything in that committee. But we all should be working together. And I feel like some of this is coming from the top down. I really do. And that's why, and normally when there's a crisis, everybody rallies around. And I'm so disappointed to see that we're not rallying together, and there's so much divisiveness right now.
Rep. Solomon or Rep. Knope, your thoughts?
I just basically have Arizona examples of exactly what Representative House and Senator Berman covered. I will say, it's interesting. So Republicans control both the House and Senate. The partisan split in the Senate is 13 Democrats, 17 Republicans, and then it's 29-31 in my chamber. But the Senate has been working a lot more closely with the governor's office. So the Senate sine died. They ended or did the first step of ending the regular session on Friday, but the House Republicans continue to stay open. So we're kind of experiencing this constitutional crisis where there's a lot of questions. We haven't really had one chamber sine die this far in advance of another chamber intending to sine die. So, but the House Republicans are trying to keep the regular session open so that they can work on pet bills, and they can, push through the partisan agenda that they had going before COVID really spread and shut down the country. So the Senate is one step ahead of the House in adjourning so that we can move forward into a special session exclusively to try and deal with COVID-19 related legislation. But the House, we're not there yet. I don't know when we're going to get there. I mean, the last thing I'll say is I just, it's such a shame, because if you actually looked at the pure number of legislators in the House, the vast majority would support sine die and the regular session so that we can move on to a special session. But that really goes to show you the nature of the hyper-partisanship in the House Republican caucus, where because the majority of the House Republicans have shifted and decided that they want to keep working on voter suppression bills, and they want to keep working on other bills that would be punitive to transgender students. Like, these are the bills that they're holding out for, instead of actually trying to help people economically who are struggling to keep the roof over their head, or the people who are struggling with childcare because they still have to work at their grocery store job. Like, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. But that's where we're stuck, and we still see that partisanship, at least in one chamber.
Thank you. Senator Knope, as our lone Republican on the panel, would love to hear you weigh in on this question and what it feels like for you.
You know, it's so interesting because when I was in the House, I was in the majority in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was the majority leader. And now I'm in a super minority. We have super minorities in both chambers for Republicans. Democrats control everything. And the similarities are that Democrats don't want to have a special session. So, because they want to be able to do it. And so it's not a party thing, it's a power thing. And whatever party's in power, they're going to try to take advantage. You know, the interesting thing was this weekend, and I don't know why I did it, I just came across a John F. Kennedy quote. You know, let's not seek the Republican answer, let's not seek the Democrat answer, let's seek the right answer. And so, you know, we need to be seeking right answers, and each party is not always right. And we need to focus on what our constituents need, not on this, you know, this partisan stuff about elections and what's going to happen. And, you know, we have some real seriously fiscal issues that we have to address that spill over into human need of food, shelter, and, you know, and jobs. And we need to make sure that we're paying attention to those things and not worrying about campaign finance or, you know, who's going to be Secretary of State, or, you know, how many Republicans or Democrats are going to be in each chamber come November of this year. So I would hope that we'll be able to reach more of a bipartisan tone as we get, quite frankly, further into this crisis, because just because states are moving people back to work does not mean that we're kind of through the crisis. COVID will be with us for months, if not years. And, you know, this recession could easily turn into a depression if we are not careful with what is happening.
Indeed. Sobering, but true, at least in my assessment. I want to turn to one particular issue that is near and dear to my heart and AAUW's heart, and that's voting and elections. I know that we're all concerned about what voting is going to look like in November, if not before, if your state hasn't already had their primary. I know that for me, DC's is coming up in a couple weeks in early June, and I was able to access an absentee, no questions asked absentee ballot, but that's not the case in all states. I'm wondering what you all are doing in your state to make sure voting is accessible for all of your citizens. And I know that in Oregon, Senator Knope, that you all have had a great vote by mail system for quite some time. So this is maybe not the same crisis for you all that it is in other states, but I also think that you probably have a unique perspective to lend in terms of how it works and what other hiccups you might be facing.
Yeah, so we have about a 20-year history of vote by mail, started around 2000. Before that, we kind of had this bifurcated system where you could be a permanent absentee voter, and we got to about 50-50 of the electorate being permanent absentee versus going to the polls. And finally, about 2000, we kind of switched over to all vote by mail. It's really important to monitor that, but I mean, when you sign up to be a voter in the state, you know, you have to have, you know, a birth certificate. You have to prove that you're, a resident of the state, citizen, and so on. And so over the years, there's been very little voter fraud as it relates to our vote by mail system. There's always a little bit, but I think, many of us have looked at this multiple times and believe that generally it's the safest way to do it. I would be super concerned with states that have other voting systems, because we still darken the oval, and it's on paper. We have the ballots. Some states, you get a receipt, you vote on these electronic machines. I wouldn't trust any of them. So I think we need to move the country toward an all vote by mail system where you have the ballots that you can recount. And Florida, of course, is the famous examples of the hanging chads. Lucky you guys. But Oregon system has been actually really well, and we're in the middle of an election. We have a week left today, and so our primary election will be next Tuesday, and the ballots are already coming in, and we moved to make sure you didn't have to provide postage, so you can just either drop your ballot off at a box, or you can drop it in the mail. And although today is the last day, if you're listening from Oregon, you shouldn't mail after today. You should drop off at a regular polling site.
Thanks very much. Anyone else want to weigh in on voting challenges, Senator Berman?
Sure. So we are the famous hanging chad state, and my county is the famous hanging chad county. But we have made tremendous progress since then, and we do have a paper trail now for all of our voting. And we do have vote by mail in Florida. It's available for anyone for any reason. And we also have at least 1 week of early voting, and then we actually have voting on the day of elections. We, as Democrats, had asked that everybody get a vote by mail ballot. I don't think that's going to happen. We probably won't do that. But I know that in my county, Palm Beach County, our supervisor of elections just sent out a postcard to everyone who has not requested a vote by mail ballot, giving them the information about how they can request a vote by mail ballot. So we are pushing it heavily, everyone in the state, and Palm Beach County, for the first time in my history here, we actually are paying postage, which is a great thing that Senator Knott talked about also. So we are going to be promoting vote by mail. They're also the supervisors, all of our supervisors of elections, which is a very bipartisan group because it's elected, you are elected in your county. They sent a letter to the governor, and they asked that for more longer periods of early voting. They're very concerned about poll workers also. I saw in the chat room somebody wrote about that. When we just had our primary, which was horrible on March 17th, because it was right in the heart of the COVID situation, and they did do an in-person primary. A lot of the people who were our poll workers and have traditionally been our retired elderly, and they've been doing it for years, and they were scared to death to show up. And so a lot of them didn't show up. So that's going to be a big problem nationwide, I think, getting people to be poll workers. So that's all the more reason why we've got to be promoting vote by mail and early voting and getting people to the polls so that we don't have to have as many people who are poll workers on election day. But I'm pretty optimistic about it. I feel like Florida's really making progress on the issue about vote by mail, and I think I'm hoping that we will be okay and that the governor will answer all the supervisors of elections recommendations that they put forward, including we are one of the states that have not taken the federal CARES money, $20 million for voting, and we haven't taken it yet, but hopefully we will as things progress, and we'll see some progress in terms of making sure that voting takes place. We have a primary also in August, and then our presidential election in November.
Yeah, I would say for Ohio, yeah, it was interesting for our primary. Our primary basically was extended because the polling locations got shut down, which caused a whole just mass of confusion, which we went to a April 28th extended primary. But it's the whole thing of really doing, we as a state just need to do a better job with voter education. getting people familiar with the ways to vote. In addition to with our early voting system, it is not equitable because it's one voting or drop-off location per county, but we have counties that one that has 5,000 compared to one that has over 1 million. You see what I'm saying? So we have some real work that needs to be done in being able to equitably allow people to exercise their right to vote. As far as, providing the postage for applications, even our system of to request a vote by mail, you actually have to put it in the mail. You can't just do it directly online, which is problematic. It's things that are in our system that is not, it's just not a free flowing and ease of access. Some of our deadlines of like people requesting, because again, now when you have a shift of vote by mail, you are dependent on another entity, which is the Postal Service, right? Which some mail that was taking 2 to 3 days would now take 5 to 7 days. So it was just like, we really have to be more thoughtful. And if we say we want to go and embrace the system, investing the resources so that people can actually participate, that people know this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to keep you safe. Senator Berman talked about poll workers when it was the night before our original primary on March 17th, our county was down 50% poll workers. Do we think that's not going to be the case in November? So it's just things that we really have to be thoughtful. And we, being in a state where people don't even take this crisis seriously, and then depending on them to be the stewards to make the necessary investments so that people can participate. It's a stretch, but it's the responsibility of people to continue to raise those voices, point out things that this can help all people to participate in our election process. And we're just going to keep pressing forward. It's a lot of groups that are asking for it, and we just got to do our best because, again, the people that we vote for are the decision makers now, right? So people happy or sad, we all have a responsibility in this. And our people are learning more so than anywhere else. You might not like politics, but government controls your life. And if you wouldn't learn that lesson, people are definitely learning it during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. And Rep. Solomon, I want to pivot and start a conversation on a different topic before we run out of time, but one that I think is on a lot of people's minds, and that's education. And wondering what it looks like in your state, not necessarily right now, but for the fall. If you can predict how you think things are going to go, specifically at the K-12 level, but also happy for any insights about higher education.
Yeah, so, just echoing what they all said about elections, same thing in Arizona. That's the committee I'm on. So we just sent a letter to the governor so the governor can make the call for all mail election. Regarding education, so we just had a briefing by the superintendent of public instruction in Arizona, which fortunately the voters, as Rep. House was saying, elections do matter. They have consequences. Unfortunately, the voters replaced the seat from Republican to a Democrat who actually was a special education teacher. So it's been amazing to work with her because she's actually a professional. She actually believes in equity for students. And some of the struggles and some of the battles that we have set forth in front of us was before the superintendent finally stepped in. And once she stepped in, the governor kind of had to follow suit. What we saw at the beginning of March was that school districts, and this is similar to the federal level, right? The federal level doesn't adopt a universal policy for all the states. So each state has to decide how they're going to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. So we were seeing the same thing at the school board level around spring break, where some school districts were coming back after spring break and some school districts weren't coming back. So since the school year is ending, everyone's hoping for a slowdown of the virus during the summer, but what we know from other countries that already have had warmer climates than us, that there's no signs that that actually causes a complete halt of the virus. We will still have hot pockets happening throughout the summer. And in a state like Arizona, where there has been a lot of undertesting, it's difficult to know where we will be at the end of July, beginning of August, whether or not it would be safe to reopen the schools. And my fear is that it's just very disappointing that politics, that it just works this way. I don't think it should, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to see pockets of infections again. Schools start having to make the calls on their own before the state makes a universal call. Okay, we're going to shut the whole system down. And it's not an easy call to make this early, quite frankly, because there's a lot of parents who are frustrated because there's no place to send their kids while they're working, while they still have to take care of the household. And there's a big question in Arizona how we fund our public schools. It has to be, for our public district schools, it has to be bodies in the classroom, physically there. And so there's this open policy question where we have to figure out, and I believe that the legislature has to do this. So, I mean, maybe the governor could do it through executive order, but I do believe that it most likely has to be the legislature to at least either temporarily or permanently amend the formula so that if a school doesn't physically open up because it's not safe to, they can still get that funding based on online enrollment. So that's one of the things that they're working on as well, just because of all the unknowns for the fall. And then last, one of the big fights is the Federal CARES Act money that was allocated to go towards education, and huge portions of that funding that each state received. There is, my understanding is there isn't language to prevent supplantation, or I don't think that's a word, but supplanting. So given the budget shortfall that we're going to see in every single state throughout the country, for us, it's going to be a big fight, I believe, with the Republicans to try and not let them rely on the federal government to cut state funding to our public schools and replace that with federal dollars, because we are one of the states that never even restored funding to our public education system to pre-2008 recession levels. So that's the most I can offer right now. I know it's not the best answer. I wish we had more clear answers, but it is a mixture of policy, but also just waiting for that right moment to see if we have to make some of those tough calls again.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on the education question and how you all are thinking through it? Senator Berman?
Sure. So one of my fellow senators is a superintendent of schools, so it's great to have him there, and he gives us information. So Florida closed their schools down like everyone else, and we closed it through the entire school year. We've had some real issues with kids not having access to computers. We've been trying to work on the digital divide issue. We've also had kids who are really probably have significant learning loss during this time period, and that's something that we're all going to have to address, whether the children need to repeat a school year. We'll see how that goes. Most of our summer school, all of our summer school programs are now canceled. But what I did hear from our superintendent is that they're looking to potentially try and restart school in early August. And they said one of their biggest problems right now is the buses. How are we going to be able to bus children and not have them be right on top of one another? So there are going to be just so many issues. I mean, of how we are going to set up the facilities, how we are going to, for the teachers and the support staff. So I think that figuring out how to do education in the fall is going to be beyond difficult. And I don't know where we're going to go from there. I'd agree with Rep. Solomon. It's going to be a quagmire, and I don't know what's going to happen.
So many unintended consequences and ripple effects on this. It's pretty staggering. Rep House, were you going to weigh in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the biggest thing we know in the traditional sense, budgets are shot. I mean, it's a significant investment that states make into education, and with the looming budgetary cuts that Ohio will be facing, um, I would say a silver lining. We know the traditional way of education will be a mess if we only focus on doing things the way it was. I guess I would encourage, like, even for the participants that are listening, like, take this opportunity. Government is one thing, but communities, like, reimagine education. One of the things, just fundamentally, I always tell people, education, the way that it was designed, was never designed for the majority of children in 2020 to succeed. So we could be, like, really truly taking this time to reimagine what does education look to be, like, affirming to children, to actually get them to learning, like, being innovative, like, even looking at different economic models, right, of what is teaching. You know, it may be like small group, community, street teaching, which is drastically different. It's probably hard for people to grasp, but I would just encourage people to utilize this time. If we are only solely focused on delivering education the way that it has been, it will have disastrous consequences moving forward, because we will not be able to deliver it. And we are in an educational system too that has not even reinvented itself since the beginning of education. So I guess that's the silver lining, that I would just plant seeds for people to go deeper, to think globally and broadly of how we can deliver education, knowing the challenges we are going to have delivering this system as we have been.
Thank you. Well, while somewhat apocalyptic, I also think that that's a really potentially hopeful statement, and something to latch on to try and, make some lemonade out of the lemons that we currently have. So with that nugget, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and start to wrap up. But I hope that each of our panelists can leave us with one more nugget. I'd love to hear something that you all have been inspired by, has surprised you over the last couple months, or a direction that you hope to see us go, even though it might take a little bit of time to get there, as Rep House was just talking about with education. So leave us with your nugget of knowledge.
I'll start. I would just say, just for people to understand that this system that is guiding our lives is the people's system, but people just don't realize it and they don't know it. And so I would just encourage them, regardless of all the back and forth, the fighting and the negativity, the people's will can truly be exerted if they take it. People need to vote. And people also need to not just vote, but you also need to tell the people that voted what you want them to do, what you want them to focus on. Like, if people actually did that, we would have a drastically different system that was more accommodating to the masses of people. And so that would be my thing is, from now through whenever your primary election may be, or through November, of really taking an opportunity and connecting with your neighbors, not just with your neighbors, the people that you live on the street with, connect with them and begin to participate and vote for people that will truly work for you. So that's my message. Get busy in 2020 and beyond.
Thank you. Senator Knoop?
Yeah, thank you. I have always been impressed with our community and the spirit that's in our community. And there's a group that started called Pandemic Partners, and it was on Facebook, and it's got over 10,000 members. And people just put their needs up there, and other people in the communities take care of those needs. And government lots of times takes way too long to react to needs, yet individual community members are meeting the needs of other community members. And so I'm just always impressed with the spirit that people have, even in times of struggle. So I think that's a bright spot that's come out of what we're currently in.
Thank you. Rep Solomon?
Every single day I wake up, and some days are good days, some days are blah. I just want to reassure with everyone that's normal, and it's okay to be okay, and it's okay not to be okay. But I think at that macro level, we were already experiencing so many epidemics in this country, so many disparities when it comes to income inequality, educational inequities, healthcare disparate outcomes, that COVID-19 has just put it all under a microscope, so much so that you can't ignore it anymore and you can't unsee it. And that is where, as other panelists have already described, that really is where there is a lot of opportunity to reimagine the systems that we have that clearly have been failing us and are definitely failing us in the midst of what will be a multi-year global pandemic. And so we are very fortunate that we live in a country where we do have the right to vote. For a lot of us who fortunately haven't had the privilege of that taken away. And whether you live in a state like California, where, fortunately the governor took the responsible move to decide to send everyone a ballot to their own home, or you live in a state like Wisconsin, where, 52 people became infected because the elected officials decided to not put public health first. We all have to vote this year. I just keep thinking, what if the administration had been different at that federal level? I keep thinking, what if we didn't flip one of the chambers of Congress last cycle, and what would the response look like thus far? Elections have consequences, and now more than ever, it is life and death for people, for Americans. Tens of thousands of people have already died, people who didn't have to die, right? So just hold on to the fact that change is possible. If you're not happy, or if you feel like we can be doing more, the honest truth is we can be doing more. But we need to make sure that we are really paying attention, top of the ballot, all the way to those local school board races, all the way to your district attorney, county attorney, sheriffs, and just participate at every single level this year, and encourage your networks and your communities to do the same.
Thank you. And Senator Berman, last word for you.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having this panel. And it's been a pleasure to be with all these fellow legislators. My last word, I'm trying to be a little bit positive, and I would say it kind of goes a little bit off of what Rep. Salmon said, and that is society has kind of like looked at everything and said, you know what, look at these essential workers. What an amazing job they're doing. I mean, we've got janitors, we've got people working in grocery stores, and everybody, and not to mention the healthcare workers, which certainly everybody is so proud and happy that they stepped forward. And I think that it's changed our perspective as a society, and maybe it will result in some pay equity issues for some of these people. I mean, I've been fighting for 15 for a long time, and I think that this is a really strong case why we need to be paying everybody a living wage, because these people are doing the bulk of the work that's helping us. And on a final note, teachers, now that all these parents are home and having to homeschool their children, I think people are seeing the value of teachers. I know in the state of Florida, we actually just finally in our budget put in a nice significant raise for teachers, and I'm really hopeful that it doesn't get vetoed, even with everything that happens to our budget, which will happen. But I think that we're starting to really see who's important, like all the celebrity discussions that we used to have in the country about, the Kardashians and whoever else. They're pretty irrelevant right now, and instead we're really honoring the people who are out there making our lives possible. So I'm happy to see that, and I hope that continues even as we move forward.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank all four of you for giving your time, your expertise, your insights to this really valuable conversation. I know there were a ton of questions that we couldn't get to. I took moderator privilege and asked the ones that I was most interested in. So thank you all for bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I do want to note that this has been recorded and it will be posted on the AAUW website at aauw.org. I wish that we could talk for hours more, but maybe we'll have to have a follow-up conversation to see how things are coming in a few weeks or months. But more than anything, thank you for your service to this country. Thank you all for being leaders at this really scary time. And thank you for all of our attendees for participating, for your insightful questions. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. And I wish everyone good health and safety, and have a lovely evening. Take care.